Today we're gonna do a deep dive on one of the mother sauces, which is bechamel sauce. The mother sauces are building blocks. When you master the basics of them, you can then manipulate them to create more complex sauces. For example, the bechamel that we're making today, we can add cheese to it, turn it into a Mornay sauce, and then use that for many other applications. We're gonna do a deep dive on bechamel, and we can just quickly touch on the other ones. You have tomato, hollandaise, which is an emulsification of egg yolks and butter, velouté, which is made with stock and a light roux. We're gonna talk about roux in a second, and espagnole, which is made with a darker stock and a darker roux. When it comes to roux, the interesting thing is the darker you toast the flour, the darker your roux, the more flavor you're imparting, but it won't work as well to thicken your sauces and stews. The lighter your roux is in color, the more delicate it will be in flavor, but it will also thicken your sauce more aggressively. I like bechamel because it's good for home cooks practicing how to salt a sauce, how to thicken a sauce. It's not necessarily about the particular bechamel sauce. You're learning skills that apply to all cooking. Today we're gonna do a little bit of a test. We're gonna do sort of like the lazy boy version of our bechamel and the classic like restaurant version. If you're feeling sort of sluggish, you make your roux and you add milk straight from the fridge and you whisk it together. You're gonna make a bechamel. It might be a little bit lumpy. That's what we're gonna test today. The other version is warming some milk on the stove and mixing it with your roux to make a classic restaurant bechamel. We'll see if there's a difference between the lazy boy and the restaurant version. The ratio I use for my bechamel, 2 tablespoons of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter, and 1 cup of milk. So for every 1 cup of sauce, that's your ratio, and you can bulk it up as you need to. I've added butter to each pot. I'm gonna add equal amounts of flour, so I'm gonna make a double batch of bechamel. The temperature on the stove is low. The butter is gonna melt gently. We're gonna add the flour and stir it just until the flour is no longer raw. The flour is cooking in the butter. We don't want any color on our flour today. The bechamel is gonna be a purely white sauce. There may be times where you want a slightly thicker bechamel. If you're making cream spinach, let's say you want a really tight, thick sauce, you might add a little bit more flour than I'm using today. If you want a thinner, more velvety sauce, you can add a little bit less flour. It's a versatile thing. You can customize it for your own need. The roux has been cooking for about a minute or two, just this gentle sort of bubbling that's happening here. A little bit looser than a paste, I would say, is fine. First, I'm gonna add the hot milk to this pot, and we're gonna make a classic bechamel. To this pot, I'm gonna add cold milk, which you're not technically, like, you might get yelled at in a restaurant if you did it that way, but we're gonna see, is there anything to that rule? Does it matter whether you heat the milk up first or not? You wanna be whisking constantly while you add the milk here to help ensure that there's no lumps in your sauce. The heat had been pretty low on the roux because we didn't want it to toast or burn. Now that the milk is added, I'm gonna bump the heat up. We're gonna simmer this sauce for a few minutes. It's gonna thicken. Then part of the fun of the bechamel is shutting off the heat at just the right consistency. If you shut the heat off too soon, you'll have a sauce that's very loose. If you cook it too long, your sauce will be too thick. While this is cooking, let's add the cold milk to this one. You don't wanna leave your bechamel sauce unattended for too long. The bottom of the pot can scorch pretty quickly. You don't need to be constantly stirring like a risotto, but you wouldn't want to walk away for more than a minute or two. When you're making bechamel, the type of pot doesn't really matter all that much. You just want something wide enough that when you stir, you're not nervous you're gonna spill over the side. A lot of home cooks, I think, can strain themselves with pots and pans that are too small, and they're trying to stir and food is sort of falling out of their pot. It's nice to use something a little bit bigger and wider. Be comfortable. So I like the way this is looking. It's starting to thicken up. It's almost at the consistency where I would shut off the heat, because on the stovetop underneath the heat, it's gonna seem loose. And then when you shut the heat off, as it cools, it's gonna thicken even more.
What do we got here?
Hey, Eric.
How's it going?
So we're making 2 versions of bechamel sauce. When I was in kitchens, there was a lot of pressure on cooks to warm up the milk before you added it to your roux to make the sauce.
Right.
If you didn't do that, I think you'd get sort of yelled at.
Yeah.
But then if I'm lazy, I'm at home, I have my roux, I've added milk to the pot and thought like, this is fine. Like straight cold out of the fridge.
Yeah.
So we're doing it head to head to see if it really matters or not.
Yeah, they look quite similar.
Yeah.
And I actually don't warm my milk either, mostly out of laziness.
Yeah, exactly.
But Chef John on YouTube, he taught me that cold milk and a hot pan makes for a smoother bechamel. I don't know if I can tell the difference, but
you know what? Right now, this was the cold milk, and I think it looks a little bit smoother compared to this one, which seems a little lumpy to me, to be honest.
Yeah, this one does look smoother.
It's almost hard to tell the difference between the two.
Yeah.
But
There's something about the cold milk coming together, coming to heat with the flour and the butter.
Yeah.
That seems to make it smoother. Because when you put the hot milk in, or at least in my experience, it feels like it's already done cooking, and it just it clumps up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite things about bechamel is the timing, where you're sort of eyeballing the thickness of the sauce and estimating from the moment when you shut off the heat, it's going to continue to thicken for another minute or two.
Right.
So I don't want to shut off the heat when it's perfect texture. I want to shut off the heat almost a minute before it's a perfect texture and then let it carry over.
That's a great tip.
And for me, that's like the fun of it.
Yeah. I always take mine a little too far.
Well, you know what? That's good actually, because if you take it too far, you just add a little more milk, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, good tip for all you people out there.
Do you put nutmeg in yours?
Yes.
I love nutmeg.
I'm about to put nutmeg
really?
in mine.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm happy with this. I'm gonna shut off the heat. Now, another aspect that I like about bechamel, especially for home cooks and beginning cooks, I want to say, is it's great practice seasoning a dish. A lot of recipes will tell you a quarter teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of salt, but salt I think is very subjective.
Yeah.
And a blank bechamel with no salt in it is a great time for beginning cooks to practice adding a little bit of salt, tasting, deciding if they like it or not, adding a little more salt, because it's like a muscle that you exercise and you can get better at.
That's true.
Yeah.
Also, I always have different types of salt.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Or I happen to have flaky sea salt right now, so I've been cooking with that.
Yeah.
But, on Food 52, we try to standardize and test with kosher salt.
Right.
Are we seasoning this now?
You know what? Let's first look for texture, because that's what this thing was about. And then we could do like a seasoning challenge if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the bechamel where we used the hot milk. I'm seeing little lumps in this, to be honest.
Yeah.
Compared with this, if you give that a stir,
So smooth.
looks a touch smoother. Am I seeing things? Are they the same?
That one's lumpier.
Yeah.
There's little clumps in it. This one's smoother.
Yeah. Texturally, I think they're about the same in terms of like viscosity.
I'm gonna turn my 5-2 wooden spoon around and use the tasting spoon.
Aha. So this is with no salt, and it has nice flavor
It's really
on
good.
its own. It's very simple. You can taste the milk. Should we each do like a little bit of seasoning?
Sure.
And see how it
I'm gonna
compares?
taste this one though.
All right, that'll be interesting to see if there's a difference. Are they the same right now?
Yeah, they're pretty similar. This one is more flavorful right now. I don't know why.
Interesting. Well, you know, different pot. This burner is actually a little bit bigger and this
Yeah.
burner is smaller. It's like you never know what
This is
tiny
wider.
factors could affect.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty much the same.
Do you think we should, this is like a taste test, right? Should we measure the salt?
I
Probably.
kind of like eyeball, like
I know,
the
but
practice of like eyeballing it
And
and then
tasting it?
tasting it, and
Okay.
then like seeing where you land.
Go for it.
So I'm gonna start with 2 sort of modest pinches and see where that gets me. I'm gonna add the nutmeg here as well.
Nice.
Now the nutmeg shouldn't be, for me, it shouldn't be a dominant flavor. It's sort of like a background, sort of a
Right.
gentle,
A wisp.
yeah.
Thanks.
So the reason I like practicing adding salt without measuring is I think it has the potential to give a home cook confidence
Yeah.
to free themselves from recipes.
I love bechamel because it reminds me of all the foods that start with bechamel. So there's like, I think of mac and cheese, I think of biscuits, chicken fried steak.
Right, as like a gravy for chicken fried
Yeah,
steak.
and all those foods are comfort food.
Yeah.
Everything starts with a bechamel. It also reminds me of this microwave pizza, breakfast pizza that we used to eat growing up. And it was like a bechamel on the bottom with like scrambled eggs and bacon and stuff. But, so this, do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah, I haven't seen them since, but it reminds me of that. Do you like yours more? Yours has more nutmeg, which I really liked.
I think mine has a touch more salt than yours also.
I like the texture of mine though.
Right.
I really think you get a better texture from cold milk.
You know what? When I tasted each of these side by side, neither texture jumped out to me.
Oh yeah?
I mean, visually you can see this is a little bit lumpier than that, but when I was actually eating them together, I didn't notice a textural difference.
Right. Okay, now what are we gonna do with this bechamel?
Well, two things.
Take a straw and like sip them, I guess.
First, I want to talk about how to cool down and store your bechamel. Because if you leave it out at room temperature like this, it will develop a skin on top, which some people find gross.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that we're going to do, not in this episode, but actually in the following episode, we're going to take this bechamel sauce and add cheese to it, make a mornay, and make mac and cheese.
Oh, yum.
So tune into that. As the bechamel is cooling down, you can see it's also starting to thicken even more. If you make this in advance and store it in your fridge, it's gonna tighten up significantly, but when you take it out of the fridge and put it back on the stove and heat it up again, it will loosen up again. And like I said before, you can always add a touch of milk if you feel like it's too thick. Later, when we add cheese to this and turn it into a mornay sauce for macaroni and cheese, I am gonna add some milk to this to thin it back out, because when we add the cheese to it, that's gonna thicken it and I don't want it to be too thick. Now, in terms of storage, first of all, this is the plastic wrap we use in professional kitchens, and I feel bad for every home cook because the home cooked plastic wrap is garbage compared to this. This is like a big sturdy thing, it's easy to use. You want to press the plastic directly onto the sauce here, and that'll prevent the skin from forming. You can keep it in the fridge for about 2 or 3 days, but you should use it fairly quickly. This is a nice fresh sauce. You want to put it to use. One of my favorite ways of using bechamel is to spruce up some leftovers. This is like plain old pasta with meat sauce that we had left over in the fridge. I just reheated it in a skillet here on the stovetop. If you're bored of eating the same thing again as leftovers, put a little bechamel on it and spruce it up. The bechamel had cooled down a little bit because we were showing how to store it in the fridge. I threw it in the microwave for about a minute and now it's ripping hot again. A little bit of bechamel, it's gonna add a creaminess, a savoriness. I like the touch of nutmeg as a background flavor to the meat sauce. It's just gonna be delicious. It's almost like the classic lasagna bolognese has bechamel and meat sauce, and this is like the lazy weeknight version. You've seen bechamel. Click like and click subscribe so you can come back and see how we make the mac and cheese.